After 5 years of caring for my disabled wife, she called me her free servant. Her hidden will left me with nothing. What happened next changed everything. 5 years. 5 agonizing years I dedicated my entire life to her. Then, one casual whisper shattered everything. He's basically a free caretaker. I remember the smell of fresh banana muffins, still warm in the bag I held. The afternoon sun beat down on the rehab courtyard in Dallas. I was bringing Sarah her favorite treat, but her laughter, echoing from her small circle of fellow patients, felt like a punch to the gut. She was talking about me, my wife of 5 years. The woman I had vowed to cherish, the woman I had spent half a decade feeding, cleaning, adjusting, lifting. 5 years of learning every therapist's maneuver to prevent bedsores, 5 years of waking at 2 a.m. to her whimpers, of wiping her tears and reminding myself that love was supposed to endure the unimaginable. "Come on," she chuckled, her voice carrying across the patio. No salary, no arguments, and he's still strong enough to do all the heavy lifting. She went on, "I'm not dumb. I locked down the perfect setup early. He does it all. Feeds me, cleans the place, manages the bills. That's not a husband. That's a full-time package for free." And then, the final, chilling blow, and when I'm gone, everything goes to Chloe. Obviously, she's my girl. My fingers froze around the muffin bag. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. I had baked those muffins with such care that morning, still warm when I left home, still warm when I arrived, just like my heart had been until that exact moment. Her laughter curdled something deep inside me. I hadn't married her for gratitude or reward, I simply believed love meant loyalty. But right then, loyalty felt like a noose. I slipped away before she could notice me, terrified that if I stepped into the sunlight, she'd see my face and recognize what she'd done. Later, when I went to her hospital room, she was lying under a fleece blanket, her eyes bright with a fake sweetness. "Ethan, there you are. Did you bring the muffins?" I didn't answer. I just set the bag down beside her. No apology, no shame. Just that same unbothered tone. "You shouldn't wear yourself out, babe. You're too reliable," she added, repeating the very words she'd used downstairs. Reliable. Useful. Obedient. None of them sounded like love anymore. That night, I didn't go back to the hospital. I let the nurses handle her care. I stayed home, surrounded by the ghost of a house that had never truly been mine. It technically belonged to Sarah and her late husband. When Sarah and I married, I'd suggested a new home, something fresh, something ours. She refused, saying Chloe had grown up here, and it wouldn't feel right to move her out. Chloe was 17 then, tall, indifferent, and sharp-tongued. She barely acknowledged me, never called me by name, treating me like a tenant in her mother's shrine. Still, I stayed. I brought only a few bags, a bookshelf I built, and an old coffee table I refinished. I told myself love could grow in borrowed soil. I repainted rooms, repaired leaky faucets, and memorized Sarah's favorite recipes: okra stew, cornbread, sweet tea. On our first anniversary, I cooked for hours. Chloe walked in, sniffed, and said, "Smells like cafeteria food," before walking off. I laughed it off, believing patience could melt resentment. But patience only made me invisible. Then came the incident. Dallas, a conference, a car that crossed the line. She came home paralyzed from the chest down, sobbing. I held her, whispering, "We'll get through this." And we did, at least physically. I transformed the downstairs office into a bedroom, installed handrails, bought a mobility van, handled her insurance, arranged her mother's funeral, consoled her when Chloe dropped out of college. I thought I was building a fortress of devotion. Turns out, I was building a cage. The next morning, after overhearing her betrayal, I made breakfast like nothing had changed: grits, eggs, turkey sausage. She came home that afternoon, discharged and grinning, like a hero returning from war. "Nothing like coming home," she said as I helped her into her wheelchair. The house felt colder than ever. Chloe showed up later, rummaging through the fridge. "Mom good?" she asked, not even glancing at me. "She's resting," I replied. "Still needs help moving, so if you could." "Nah, I've got work," she interrupted, cracking open a soda. "Anyway, it's not like this place belongs to you." That sentence landed harder than a punch. I switched off the kitchen light and walked away. No yelling, no crying, just silence. A silence heavy enough to split something inside me. That evening, Sarah settled into her couch like a queen reclaiming her throne. God, I miss this sofa and that TV. No sports at the hospital, just news and baking shows. I poured her water, adjusted her pillow, and nodded. No thank you, no recognition, just entitlement wrapped in habit. Later, while unpacking her medication, I noticed the pill organizer untouched from 5 days ago. I stared at it, realizing I didn't want to refill it. Not yet. Not ever. A few days passed. I began sorting through the drawers, the paperwork, the insurance files she'd made me organize over the years. In one folder, marked Miscellaneous Accounts, I found a life insurance declaration form. The primary beneficiaries, Chloe Green and someone named Daniel Miller. I blinked. No mention of me, not even as an alternate. I wasn't expecting money, but this hit harder than any wound. When dinner came, I cooked her favorite lasagna, but changed the ingredients. No mozzarella this time, just ricotta, spinach, and red pepper flakes. She took a bite and frowned. "This tastes weird." "Where's the mozzarella?" "You know I hate it without cheese." "I was out," I said. "Didn't have time to buy more." Her tone was sharp, almost accusing. "Maybe I've just started seeing things more clearly," I replied. She fell silent, blinking, her mouth tightening. For once, she didn't have a comeback. That night, as she scrolled through her phone and I pretended to read, her earlier words looped in my mind: "He's basically a free caretaker." I realized I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a ghost, bound by routine. But ghosts can disappear when they choose. And I was already fading. I had become a machine, a background fixture in her carefully curated existence, a shadow orbiting a planet that no longer noticed me. How do you care for someone who's erased you from their future? 5 years of service disguised as devotion had left me with nothing but an aching back and a bruised soul. I thought I was a husband, but I had been an employee, paid not in money, but in crumbs of affection, reimbursed with guilt, and bound by duty. Love had become labor. Compassion was my only benefit. Silence was my severance. The next morning, I didn't make her breakfast. Instead, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the fridge, my fingers brushing against a magnet holding a photo from our first trip to Charleston, South Carolina. She was smiling in that picture. I was too, but now I could see the imbalance even in our poses. She leaned forward, radiant. I leaned in, like a man anchoring himself to a collapsing building. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached out. My old friend's number was still saved on my phone. When she answered on the second ring, her voice hit me like sunlight through a dusty window. "Ethan, that you?" Olivia said, breathless but warm. "Yeah," I whispered. "Do you have a moment?" There was a pause, then a softness in her tone. "I've got all day." "Where are you?" "Come by." I didn't pack anything. I grabbed my wallet, keys, and left. No explanations for Sarah. No note. When I arrived, Olivia stood in front of her bookstore, apron still on, hands outstretched. She hugged me without a word, then led me to the small back garden where ivy wrapped around a rusted fence. She poured me a glass of chilled ginger mint tea and said, "You look like a man who's been holding his breath for years." I couldn't deny it. The words spilled out of me like a flood breaching a dam. I told her everything, what I'd overheard at the hospital, what I'd found in the insurance documents, how Chloe looked through me as if I were a hired nurse, not family. Olivia listened quietly, not once interrupting, her eyes heavy with empathy. When I finally stopped talking, she exhaled and said, "Ethan, you weren't in a marriage. You were managing a patient." I blinked. She leaned forward. "She didn't see you as a man. She saw you as a service. You don't owe your life to someone just because they need your hands." The silence between us was almost sacred. "I'm only 32, I murmured, "but I feel 70. "That's because you've been carrying 2 lives on your back," she said gently. "You forgot what it's like to walk upright. That ends now. Stay here for a while. I've got a spare room upstairs." I nodded slowly. "I think I need to." "Good. Tomorrow, we'll visit the courthouse and see what your rights really are." That night, I lay in a small room with peeling sunflower wallpaper and a creaky ceiling fan. But for the first time in years, I dreamed not of Sarah, nor Chloe, just of myself breathing freely. When I woke the next morning, I didn't cry. I smiled. The storm was finally changing direction. Within a week, most of my belongings were in Olivia's guest room. It was small, just a twin bed, a desk, and an old radio, but it felt like peace. Olivia's bookstore, the Paper Lantern, occupied a corner in Richmond's historic district. Behind it was a courtyard bursting with hydrangeas, cosmos, and a line of yellow roses she called freedom blooms. That garden became my sanctuary, and Olivia my mirror. One afternoon, as we drank hibiscus tea surrounded by bees and sunlight, she said, "You know, most people think leaving is the hardest part, but it's not. The hardest part is realizing you're allowed to leave." She was right. For 5 years, I thought endurance equaled loyalty, that staying made me strong, but it was leaving that restored my soul. With her help, I contacted a local law firm, Hart & Lell, known for representing men and women in domestic care arrangements gone wrong. The lead attorney, Brenda Hayes, sharp-eyed and calm, listened to my story, flipping through documents, marriage certificate, hospital invoices, household bills. "Were you employed during the marriage?" she asked. "Freelance carpenter," I said. "But for the last 3 years, full-time caretaker." "Did you contribute financially?" "Yes, paid off a few debts. Even covered Chloe's tuition for a semester when Sarah was out of work." Brenda nodded, writing briskly. "Then you invested not only time, but money. That matters. You weren't just a helper. You were her spouse, caretaker, and dependent. Virginia recognizes equitable distribution. You have rights to marital assets and possibly spousal support." Even after 5 years, my pulse raced. "Really?" "Absolutely," she said firmly. "We've won stronger cases with less." I left her office lighter, not from victory, but from validation. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was reclaiming visibility. That night, sleep evaded me. I lay awake, watching the fan spin shadows across the ceiling, remembering every quiet dinner, every ignored conversation, every moment I'd let myself disappear behind Sarah's needs. The next morning, I took my first real step. I filed for legal separation. Then I called my cousin, David, a financial advisor who had helped countless people restart after divorce. He picked up on the first ring. "It's time, huh?" he said knowingly. "Yeah," I whispered. "It really is." Within days, David connected me to a certified financial planner, helped me open my own bank account, and begin assessing the assets Sarah and I shared. He also introduced me to a men's support group called New Dawn, where I met others who'd lived parallel lives. One man had cared for his disabled girlfriend for 8 years before she left him for someone else. Another had funded his partner's education only to be abandoned once she succeeded. A third was contesting a prenup he'd signed out of blind trust. We laughed, cried, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel foolish for having loved too deeply. Back at Sarah's house, things shifted. She began texting first. Short, polite messages, "Hey, are you coming by to grab your stuff?" Then came the guilt trips, "We should talk. People will wonder what happened." Finally, Chloe's messages appeared, angry, defensive. "You're being dramatic. You're ruining your life over hurt feelings." I didn't respond. Silence became my language. One evening, Olivia came upstairs holding her phone. "You might want to see this," she said, handing it to me. It was Chloe's social media post. Some people crave sympathy for their choices. My mom's not a villain just because she didn't dedicate her life to a man who knew what he was signing up for. Y'all love drama. I stared at it, then deleted the app. I didn't need an audience. I had already reclaimed my story. In court, Brenda moved fast. She demanded Sarah's full financial disclosures, insurance, retirement, and credit statements. That's when we discovered she'd transferred $40,000 to Chloe's account just 2 months before I left. "That's asset redirection," Brenda said. "We'll challenge it." For the first time, I felt the scales of justice tilt slightly my way. But the real shift came when Sarah's attorney tried to arrange a settlement meeting without me. Brenda refused. "My client insists on transparency. He's not settling in the dark. He's earned his right to light." Something inside me flared. Quiet, fierce, unstoppable. Not triumph yet, but liberation. The night before the court hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay beneath the ceiling fan, moonlight flickering across the room, thinking about how far I'd come. From a man who tiptoed around his own house to one walking into court with a lawyer by his side. I wasn't scared anymore. I was clear. The next morning, I dressed simply, navy slacks, white shirt, no tie. Power didn't come from appearance. It came from truth. Downstairs, Olivia handed me breakfast. Steel-cut oats, almond butter, mint tea. "You ready?" she asked softly. I nodded. I was. I had never been more ready for anything. David picked me up in front of the bookstore that morning, dressed in a gray suit with sharp lapels and that unshakable confidence he always carried. "You look like a man who finally knows his worth," he said with a grin. At the courthouse, things moved faster than I expected. Brenda handled the pre-hearing filings while I sat quietly, palms pressed together, studying my breath. Sarah arrived an hour later, wheeled in by Chloe. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but spiritually, like the world had finally caught up to her arrogance. Her skin was pale, her posture rigid, her gaze avoiding mine. The courtroom was cold, humming with the low static of air conditioning and consequence. When the judge entered, everything sharpened. Brenda stood and with calm precision walked the court through 5 years of unpaid caregiving, financial contribution, emotional exhaustion, and human sacrifice. She presented screenshots of transactions, medical notes from my doctor about stress-induced insomnia, and even one of Chloe's old social posts mocking me. When Brenda revealed the $40,000 transfer Sarah had made to Chloe's account 2 months before I left, the judge's pen stopped mid-air. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to drown in. Sarah's attorney attempted to argue that I had chosen to be a caretaker and therefore deserved no compensation for love. Brenda's brow lifted slightly as she replied, "He's not asking for payment for love. He's seeking acknowledgement for labor. There's a difference." When it was my turn to speak, the judge asked me a single question: "Do you believe this marriage was reciprocal in care, respect, and dignity?" I didn't hesitate. "No, Your Honor. I gave everything, and in return, I received nothing." That was it. No theatrics, just truth. 2 days later, the verdict arrived. I was awarded 35% of our marital assets, including part of the retirement fund, and $800 per month in support for 18 months. The court also reversed the $40,000 transfer to Chloe, labeling it an attempt to conceal assets. I didn't feel triumphant, just clean. It wasn't revenge, it was release. That night, I sat with Olivia on the back patio of her shop beneath the sky streaked with violet. She handed me a glass of sparkling apple cider. "To new chapters," she said. We clinked glasses, and for once, the word new didn't feel terrifying. Sarah never contacted me again, but Chloe did, furious. 3 days later, she barged into the shop during closing hours, slamming her hand on the counter. "You're proud of yourself, huh?" she spat. "You got your little payday, took food off my mom's plate. You think that makes you a man?" I didn't respond. I kept folding wrapping paper, my hands steady. "You were just a replacement. My dad was the real man in her life. You were convenient. You won't get another cent. You hear me?" Before I could speak, Olivia stepped out from the back, eyes blazing. "Say one more word and I'm calling the police," she said. Chloe froze, sneered, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the chimes fell silent. I didn't flinch. I simply swept the dirt she left behind out the door. "You okay?" Olivia asked. "Yeah," I said quietly. That was her storm, not mine. Later that night, I opened an old photo album I hadn't touched in years. There was one picture of Sarah and me before the incident, both of us smiling. Outside a concert venue. I stared at it for a long while. It was fine to remember, but it wasn't fine to return. By then, I had started working remotely for a small publishing company, doing freelance editing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My name on the invoices, my password on the account, my signature on the tax forms. For the first time in years, I was creating something that didn't belong to someone else. My work. My effort. My identity. I also joined a local writing group at the library. Once a week, a handful of us would gather to read essays and poems over coffee. The first piece I shared was called, "What Love Costs When It Stops Being Mutual." They applauded. A few people wiped away tears. One woman said, "This is the kind of story that makes men feel seen." I hadn't expected that reaction, but I realized I needed it, too. A few months later, while repotting flowers in the shop with Olivia, a courier arrived with an urgent letter. It was from the hospital. Sarah had been admitted 2 nights earlier after a hypertensive crisis and a brief cardiac arrest. Her file listed no next of kin. The fields for emergency contact were blank. I stood there reading it without panic or pity, just stillness. Then I called Brenda and said, "Transfer all health decisions to Chloe." Hours later, she texted back, "Done." Apparently, Chloe didn't show up at the hospital either. "Too busy," the nurses said. No visitors came. For a woman who once thrived on control and admiration, that silence must have been louder than any courtroom ruling. She had built a life of dominance and dependence, and now it had collapsed into isolation. Meanwhile, I began to breathe differently. Summer arrived. The mornings softened. I woke without dread. Cooked breakfast for myself. Oatmeal with honey, eggs on sourdough, sometimes just fruit and tea. Cooking for myself became a quiet rebellion, an act of restoration. I started a blog called Unkept Vows. The first post was titled, "From Being Needed to Being Seen." It was about what it costs to love someone until you vanish and what it means to finally choose yourself without bitterness. The post went viral. 4,000 readers in a week. Men and women alike wrote back, teachers, nurses, single parents, even a 26-year-old artist from Oakland who had just left a manipulative partner. One comment stayed with me, "You put into words what I didn't know I was allowed to feel." Thank you. A few weeks later, David stopped by again with a brass plaque engraved, "This space belongs to Ethan." We mounted it above the small shelf in the upstairs flat where I kept my books and candles. Olivia grinned and said, "See, you didn't just leave a marriage. You reclaimed your name." On weekends, I helped her at the shop. Customers loved the floral arrangements I put together, odd combinations of colors that somehow harmonized, much like my life. Uneven, scarred, but beautiful. One woman laughed at a label I'd written, "Resilience Bloom." "What's that mean?" she asked. "It means you bloomed late but completely," I said, smiling. That afternoon, I received one last message from the hospital's caseworker: "Your name has been removed from all emergency contact lists. No further action required." I didn't cry. I didn't feel joy or grief, just closure. I closed my phone, stepped outside, and stretched my arms toward the Virginia sky. It was done. That same week, I finished editing my first full-length manuscript, a memoir by a woman who had escaped a controlling community. She ended her book with this line: "Leaving the fire doesn't mean you were weak for staying. It means you were brave enough to stop burning." I added that quote to my blog's footer. 2 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a support conference hosted by New Dawn. At first, I doubted my story mattered. But when I stood on that stage and saw the faces of people who had lived the same quiet pain, the words poured out effortlessly. I told them everything. Not just the betrayal, but the erasure, the loneliness, and the resurrection of self. When I finished, the room stood. Some wiped tears. Others simply nodded, as if they had been waiting their whole lives for someone to name what they'd endured. Afterward, one man hugged me and whispered, "You gave me permission to start over." In that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. Back home, I painted my room a soft amber hue, hung David's plaque above the bed, and lit a eucalyptus candle. Sometimes, grief still visited, but I didn't scold myself for it. Grief wasn't proof of weakness. It was proof I'd cared. Months later, I passed Chloe on the courthouse steps. Our eyes met. This time there was no anger, only quiet recognition. She looked away first. I kept walking, because I was never meant to shrink for someone else's comfort. I wasn't meant to serve and vanish. I was meant to live. Today, I run a small newsletter with over 7,000 subscribers, teach online writing workshops, and recently enrolled in a creative nonfiction course at the community college. Some afternoons I sit on the patio behind Olivia's shop, sipping tea while the wind stirs the roses, thinking about how far I've come. I didn't just survive love that turned into servitude. I outgrew it. My name is Ethan, and I am not a caretaker. I am not an accessory. I am a man who chose to walk away when devotion became erasure. I gave until I disappeared. Now I write myself back into existence, one sentence at a time. This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. Because healing doesn't whisper, it roars. What would you have done if you heard those words?